All right, today is Monday, June 2nd, 2025. I am the interviewer, Amy Moritz, with Gina Castelli in the Julia B. Reinstein Library. Gina was a standout athlete at Archbishop Carroll High School, receiving all Catholic honors in basketball 3 times and volleyball twice. She went on to Canisius College, where she played for the legendary Sister Maria Perez. Her freshman season, the Griffs went to the Elite Eight of the 1983 NCAA Division II championship, and she earned honorable mention freshman All-America honors. Gina went on to coach women's basketball at Siena College in Albany, New York for 22 years, where she was named the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference Coach of the Year 5 times. She then coached 8 seasons at LeMoyne College in Syracuse.
Mm-hmm.
Gina, thanks for stopping by today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is fun. Going back in time. I hope I can remember.
Going back. Remember as best as you can now,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
So first, tell me about a time that you first remember falling in love with sports.
Well, I grew up, in the city of Buffalo, and first of all, we had neighbors that were always active in sports, and, you always played outside, so that was one. But I had a cousin, my only male cousin. My parents are from Italy, and my dad's family, they all immigrated to the U.S., and it was only his sister. So we had one male cousin, and he was really into sports. And one day I was down in their basement, and he had a basketball there, and I think I was about 5 years old, and he just said, "Let's see if you can dribble the basketball." And I started dribbling it, and I was pretty good. And then he said, "Try to do it with your left hand." And then that's actually when I really started loving basketball, and then I really got into more sports after that too. But he kind of kick-started, the whole love for the sport of basketball and love for sports.
Uh-huh. So that's so many people. It's family. That first introduction to it.
Yeah.
Were there opportunities? So then, as you grow, get outside of the family, get a little bit older, were there opportunities for you to play organized? What was that like?
Yeah, when I look back at my time, in Buffalo, I feel like God put me in a situation where I just grew up at the best time in my life. I literally lived on Lovejoy, and we were about a little bit, maybe like a half mile from Hennepin Park, and they also had a Hennepin Park Community Center. And at the Hennepin Park Community Center, there was this woman, Judy Zaccanino, that really was a strong, powerful woman that was the director there. And she started leagues for girls in sports, whether it was basketball, floor hockey, volleyball. And she created this community of sports there. And so all the kids in the neighborhood, started competing there. And, so we played in leagues, and that's when I was really introduced to team ball. And I started playing 6-player basketball. So that was the first, of my experience. So it wasn't just, 5. My 4th grade year, I think it was 6. And my 5th grade year, we played 6-player. So, it was just awesome. And, when Hennepin Park closed that night, you also had the park. And so games would be played outside there as well. And so we just had a great community of kids that love sports in general. And so growing up, I really felt like I grew up at the best time. I could play basketball every single day if I wanted to, and I did. It was fun.
That's wild that you played 6-on-6. So that was what you started at.
Yeah, I was a rover, and I was the one that could go, back and forth. That you had the forwards and the defensive players, and I went to a Catholic school, and we used to walk to school. So we had 3 Catholic churches in the area, and when we first attended Visitation, and that closed, and so in my 2nd grade year, I went to St. Agnes, and they started a basketball team that was run at the community center. So it was for all the Catholic schools in the Buffalo area, and it was supposed to be for kids in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, but they knew how much I played, and they knew I could play. So Sister Rose Claire asked me if I would play in my 4th grade when I was in 4th grade. So I was on the team in 4th grade, and it was a great experience. But those first few years is when I played, 6-player. It was fun. I mean, I was so I'm so grateful to these opportunities when I look back and think if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have really enjoyed playing. You know, I would have never had that experience.
Right. Was it a transition when you went from being a rover and playing 6-on-6 to then playing 5-on-5 where everybody's going up and down the court?
It wasn't for me because at the community center, we'd always play pickup ball, and it was always the boys. So it was always 5 players, and we were playing with the men's basketball all the time. So for me, it wasn't the transition was playing 6-player, you know, for me more than anything because I wasn't used to that. But you know, after those games, I would always stick around, and we would be just playing pickup ball with the boys, you know. So and that's how we played 5-on-5 or 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3. You know, we were always playing ball.
That was going to be my question then. You mentioned, you know, the playground, how much you played and how important that was. It was a Hennepin Park, right?
Yeah,
At the park then you were playing?
Yeah.
What were those games like and how often did you play? What was that like as far as your development and being an athlete and also loving the sport?
All the time. You know, I mean, when I think about it, it's like those were, you know, with my cousin helping me, you know, understand how to shoot the ball. And you know, I didn't have a basket, you know, in my backyard. My cousin did, and then little by little, my father, he put one up. But I would always go to Hennepin, and because that's where you could get all the games. And inside is where most of the guys, and you know, there were a few girls, but most of the time it was myself and the guys, and they were great to me. I don't ever feel like I was ever, you know, put on a bad team. I was picked early, you know, when you had to pick teams. And so, you know, I would go every night, you know, we would have dinner, you know, I'd go to school, have dinner, go to the park every night and, you know, walk down there, walk back. And it was awesome. We just, it was a great feel. And, you know, I got to know a lot of the people in the community because of that, you know.
And how important was, or did you feel playing with the guys was to improving your basketball?
Oh, it was, I tell, you know, when I was coaching, I always say, go play with the guys, you know, go play outside. I tell my nephews all the time, you know, I have a young nephew who's playing now, and I said the best thing you could do is just play, like get into these park games where these guys, you know, are physical, they're, you know, they're competing, you know, you learn the game so well. So, you know, the park itself was great. I mean, the thing about Hennepin Park, the community center was open for quite a long time while I was young, but during my high school years, it closed during the summer, and that was devastating to me because my cousin taught me how to train. He was really big into like bodybuilding and training, so he taught me how to, you know, train for my sport. So it was really important for me that I could get my shots up, you know, and I would do that at the indoors, especially because if it was raining or the weather in Buffalo in the winter, you know, I had a place to go. And when they said they were closing it during my freshman or sophomore year in high school, I was devastated. So I was trying to figure out every angle to how I could get into the park, because it was still open, but it wasn't open for people to play. So I went up to Judy Zaccanino, and I asked her, would you open the court for me, you know, if I came early in the morning, you know, and I just stayed for a couple hours. And she looked at me. I said, well, I got to get my shot. I got to practice, you know, I have to get my shots up. And she did it. And so, and she wasn't always there, so I would always have to find the guy who was managing the courts and, you know, the community center during that day and ask him to open up the courts. They didn't put the lights on, you know, they had some windows, and I would practice inside. And then later on those days, you know, so it was always in the summer during vacation, after I had dinner, I would go back to the courts, but I was outside. And that's when I played with the guys more. And there were always a couple of guys that would always show up. And sometimes there were more than 2 or 3, and we would play 5-on-5. But there was a couple of guys that I became really good friends with that we would play 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3. And that's really how I learned more about it's kind of the strategy of the game, you know, like the pick and roll, like the basic stuff that's so important still today, you know. So, yeah, it was all ball. It was like that's all I did, you know, so.
We'll talk about you getting into coaching later on, but I'm wondering, my perception at least, I'm not intimate in the world, my perception is that that's changed in that young kids, high school kids aren't necessarily, because things are so organized. So they're not necessarily playing every day at the park and playing those pickup games. In your experience, first of all, is that true? Did kids get into more formal? First, I'll ask you that.
I think the thing that's, it's not disappointing, but what you would really want to see, even as a coach, you want to see the passion in a player, and sometimes that as we got into it more, it increasingly decreased the passion, because so much of what these kids were doing were structured. So it wasn't just that they were playing AAU basketball. They were getting these trainers that were training them, for their skills. And that was great. And I was thinking to myself, this would have been great for me. But, sometimes, if you really love something, you just do it, and that's really, to me, what was important. Or, do you love watching the game of basketball? And if kids said no, that was a red flag to me, because, if you love the game, you're going to be watching the NBA, the WNBA, so sometimes I'm not a total big fan of that. I would help somebody, if they asked me, but I like kids, just get out there and work on your game. What do you want to work on, but it seems like everybody needs to have that special attention, which sometimes can be disappointing,
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you thought that if people are getting away from that, what they're missing. And it sounds like you said, like, passion, like developing and leaning into the passion that brought them to that sport in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, I always say, like, when I go on the basketball court, that's like my happy place, or that's just the court itself. It's like, for some people it might be taking a walk or, running or whatever. But for me, just taking shots by myself, I just felt like that was the most at peace I could be. And it's still today. Like, if I walk on a court, to me, that's where I found most peace. And I feel as though, sometimes people miss out on that experience of just get out there by yourself, and, visualize yourself making the game-winning shot, or, and you hear stories a lot like that one, from people like us that grew up and thinking you're going to beat, like, Michael Jordan or Wilt Chamberlain in my case, so, but I wish there was a little bit more of that, and I feel as though Caitlin Clark brought that back a little bit. Growing up in Iowa and seeing her, you could tell that just didn't come from a trainer. That came from a passionate kid, devoted kid, and I would say that probably everybody in the WNBA is like that. There's not a lot that can make the WNBA, and I'm sure all those women were devoted players. They didn't just rely on their trainers to make them better.
You probably didn't have a trainer when you were at Archbishop Carroll. But Archbishop Carroll, and I'm sorry I don't know this, was that all girls? Was it co-ed? It was all girls
school
at the time?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it's an all-girls school. Yeah.
Okay, because it's no longer with us.
No.
Unfortunately.
No.
So tell me about your experience at Carroll.
Carroll was a great school. My oldest sister Lucy and my middle sister Nancy went to Carroll, and when I went, Nancy was a junior, so she was 2 years older than me, and she also played basketball and she played volleyball and she was into sports. And Carroll was a great school, and I grew up. There's so many times people say about Title IX and things, but when you go to an all-girls school, or, even going to Canisius with a person like Sister Maria, you don't experience it as much. You don't see it as much because there's no boys there. So you're feeling like you're getting everything that everybody else is getting. So that experience itself was something that, when I look back, I don't remember, feeling like I didn't have. It was awesome to be able to play with my sister, because that was the only time I was, other than grammar school. And our first few years, we had some good years. And, she had a good group of friends that really helped me, my freshman year get through. And then I was a fairly quiet kid, so I met some good people, and I had good friends in high school as well. So the experience overall was great. I also had a really good experience playing volleyball. We had a team my senior year. There were only 8 of us, and we did really well. We went really far, And Carroll was never one of these schools that was really great in sports. So, we were kind of middle of the road. So we weren't going to be the top team or, go far in the playoffs. But the experience was awesome. Great teachers, and, it was run by the same nuns that ran St. Agnes. So, there was that Catholic school feel. Do I wish I went to a co-ed school? Sometimes I feel like I wish I would have expanded myself, but it was a great experience for me.
I want to ask you about that all-girls Catholic experience, because I feel, and I've said this on interviews before, my mind, those Immaculata college teams and the support of the nuns, in that. And I wonder if being in that environment and having that education, then when you go out later into the world, into Canisius, or then even on to Siena, you already know what it's like to have, maybe not major resources, but to have resources and to have that support. And if that doesn't give you some sort of a foundation that you were able to carry with you later on.
Yeah, it's interesting because thinking about this interview and thinking about Carroll, I thought about that, it's so interesting because I never felt as though, plus I came from a family of 4 girls. And my dad was strict on us, but expected us to go to college, support ourselves. He had high expectations for us too. So it's interesting because I really never felt like I didn't have, and now moving forward, I think where I found it more is when I was coaching. That's when I felt as though, wow, I need to fight for more things, for our program, or, why are they getting this and why are we getting the practice times at 6 and, still it's, the 1990s. And, that's where I felt it more. But I do feel that it was empowering, to know what you can have, and that, you do have to fight for what you believe in and what you need, for women. But so I do think, like you said, there was a built-in chemistry and teamwork and support that we probably didn't even realize at the time. And now looking back, you think, when I look back at that, I'm like, yeah, that's an interesting perspective.
That's something you only see in hindsight. When you look back at your story, you don't know it when you're living it.
No, exactly. It was just like, this is how it was, So.
Now, when you were playing, was it Monsignor Martin?
Yeah,
it was Monsignor Martin? Okay.
Good thing you reminded me of that, because I was thinking that myself. Now, what was it?
What was the league again? And how was the competition?
The competition was really good. It was always really strong, and you had, again, we were kind of always in the middle. We weren't like the worst team, we weren't the best team, but we were kind of in the middle. And then you had there were two divisions, and then you'd have Sacred Heart and Cardinal Newman. Those were the 2 best in sports on the other side. So when you went into playoffs, you'd always have to meet up and play them. And Sacred Heart had the best in terms of they had the best players always. Sister Maria did a great job in finding some of those players. Yvette Angel ended up there, but Cardinal Newman also had a really good team, and Deb Laux, who played at Canisius, played for Newman, and she was phenomenal as well. And then that school closed down, and she ended up at Sacred Heart, and then they were just kind of like a dynasty then, And so how I remember those players is more through the newspaper. I lived in the city. They were more, north. Yvette also lived in the city, but we weren't close, and I didn't really know her at the time. It was just through what I was reading in the Buffalo News or the Courier Express, seeing their stat line. So we were getting some coverage, too, in the news, which was, again, something that you wouldn't expect for women. But we did have articles, and so that's how I knew of them. And I knew that they were good players. And I also knew of them through, trying out for the Empire State Games in the Scholastic divisions. And then I knew, I'm like, they're good players. So those are the two that I always remember because us three kind of grew up at the same time. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
So you tried out for Empire State. Did you ever play on the Empire State?
I tried out for the Empire State Games, and I never made the Scholastic because it was a combined Rochester, Buffalo, and people like Cara, and then there were a lot of other players that were so good made it. So I never made those teams, but I made all the open teams. So when I played at Canisius, honestly, a lot of it is, I hate to say, sometimes you wonder if it was a little bit more political because my name wasn't out there, and but they were good players. I mean, they did well too, but after my freshman year at Canisius, my name became a little bit more public in the Buffalo area, and I think that really helped, a lot in terms of me getting and making those teams. And a couple of those teams, Sister Maria also coached, so that's another reason why I think I made it. So
comes back to you, like back. In college,
and it was fine.
Right?
I mean, that's all we had though. We didn't have AAU. We had the Empire State Games, and that's what you really were shooting for, just making those teams. Those tryouts were tough, and Pete Dickinson was also, I remember him and a couple other guys that were on the nominating, committee and, in the selection committee. So it was a lot. There were a lot of kids that, that participated and tried out for those. So, but that also gave me something to shoot for, so it's like, okay, I didn't make that, but, then I went back to Hennepin and started playing, a little harder.
Right. I think that because we haven't had the Empire State Games and AAU has kind of, come in a whole different way, we've lost a little bit about how big a deal the Empire State Games was. I would think, especially for if you were a female athlete.
It was huge. That was it. That was your recruitment too. That's where college coaches probably went to. It was a huge deal if you made it, and it was covered everywhere in the newspapers and on TV. So it was a huge deal. And then as AAU started coming into the picture more, it just Empires just was depleted. But still, when I was in college, Empire State Games was still pretty good. I mean, it still was a big deal. It just little by little you could tell that it was losing its flair. Which is too bad because it was a cool event.
Yeah, I watched it a lot as a spectator. And that was always a fun time to kind of get that Olympic kind of experience.
Yeah, it was really cool.
So you mentioned Canisius and Sister Maria. How did you end up at Canisius College?
Oh God, this is somewhat of a long story, but when I was a senior in high school, I wasn't really getting a lot of letters or anything like that. At the time you could try out for teams, to maybe get a scholarship or beyond the team. So I tried out for a couple of schools. So I went to like Niagara's tryout and Canisius tryout at the time, but Sister Maria was not there. And I didn't make their teams. I used to wear glasses and now I wear contacts, and Niagara told Sister Maria, I don't know if this is true or not, but that I wore glasses and they didn't think I was that good. So, but I always played good against Niagara then. So long story short, I didn't make that team. But when I was at Archbishop Carroll, my sister's good friend, Paula Bogdan, who is on the board for the Buffalo Hall of Fame, she went to the University of Detroit. And she was a very good student, really smart. She called and wrote a letter saying, you should come out here and try out for the University of Detroit team. And they were Division I. Canisius and Niagara were both Division II at the time. And I'm thinking, oh, this would be kind of cool. Division I, I'll try, So I went to the tryout. I did well. But then they had already selected their team, So I got this letter saying, we already selected our team, but we would love for you to come and walk on the team. And it was kind of handwritten, signed by Mary Roykel, who used to be the Niagara coach, and she was doing very well at Detroit. So I said, I think I'm going to do that, right? And again, I was a quiet kid. Both my parents Italian, we didn't stray too far from the house, and I decided I'm going to go and walk on this, this team. So my dad and my mom drove me down to Detroit, and I could tell by, my father was so mad that I was doing this. So, he didn't want me. He wanted me to stay home. Why are you going? Talking in Italian to my mother. He was not happy. And, we get there, they drop me off, and I have a pit in my stomach because I'm homesick, so I don't want to be there. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I do not want to be here. But it was, it's early, and I'm a freshman, so okay, give it a couple of days or whatever, and weeks. So, and we had to be there a little earlier to train and things. So I get there, I start doing everything on the team, and it was difficult. I realized how much I didn't know about basketball. I was really green in terms of understanding the game. Mary Royko really taught me a lot. I remember coming back from practices and the tryout and just writing down information. But I was always homesick, so homesick. I wanted to come home so bad, and I would call my mom. And at the time you didn't have you had pay phones, and you were calling collect. So collect call from Gina. And she told me right before I left, Sister Maria got the job at Canisius. Right? And she said, why don't you call Sister Maria? You know her, you like her. Why don't you see if you can go to Canisius? And I'm like, no, I already decided I'm going to Detroit. So when I called my mom from Detroit, she said, I told you should have called Sister Maria. So I said, oh, I can't call her now, It's like, I'm here. She said, well, you got to stay there now. We can't come and pick you up, So, and I would call every day, and the last time, I just said, I'm not staying here. She said, well, call Sister Maria. And I called Sister Maria collect. And she accepted. And I said, I want to come home. And would you take me? And she said, yes, I'll take you. She goes, you can come to Canisius, but you have to promise me one thing. And I said, what? You have to finish the school there. You got to finish your semester, because I was going to quit, She goes, you have to finish your semester. I said, okay. So I did. And I left University of Detroit, came back, and I decided that I just wasn't ready to go back to school like that next semester. So I took the semester off, and then I tried out for Canisius, and Sister Maria and Mike Rappel offered me a partial scholarship there. And that was the beginning of, that's a very short answer to, that was it's a long story. I could go on and on about my whole experience at Detroit. But, and that kind of was it. I mean, she offered me this partial scholarship, which for my parents and my dad, my father was working in a factory. My mother was a seamstress, so it wasn't like we had a lot. And so that was a big deal, that I got, half of my tuition paid for. And so that's how I started. It was awesome. I love her. I absolutely love Sister Maria.
Mm-hmm. There's so many Sister Maria stories, but what was it like then to play for her at Canisius?
She was tough, Sister. She was a tough woman, and but she was really good for me, and she was good to me. I was a real shy kid. I was really quiet, and she kind of brought some things out, and I was hard on myself. And I was a good shooter, but I was a shooter that I shot awkwardly. Like, if you look at my footwork, it's opposite of what most people do. I did the opposite, and she never corrected it. And I remember one time a reporter asked her, she shoots with the wrong feet, like she steps with the wrong, and Sister says, oh, I know. And he goes, well, why don't you correct it? She goes, why should I? She's a great shooter. And I always respected that, because she kind of molded you the way you were. She kind of accepted who you were, and she worked with it. But if my shot wasn't on, I would stop shooting. And she would get so mad at me. And she would take me out. And she said, if you don't start shooting, I'm not going to play you. So she taught me to just keep going when things got tough, and especially in those areas. And she was, she definitely, I felt the love, and she loved my mom, and she loved my dad, and my parents absolutely loved her too. So she just brought me out of my shell. Mm-hmm. And I owe her a lot for my success in college, and Mike Rappel. I mean, they taught me a lot about basketball, and they brought out the best in me, as did my team. Yeah. It
sounded from people I've talked to that have played at Canisius with, Sister Maria and Mike, it sounds like they complemented each other very well as a coaching staff.
They did. Well, Sister Maria, she was also working at Sacred Heart, and so she would come from her practices in high school to a college, and as a coach, when I think about what she was doing later on, I think it's impossible to do something like that and not have good support system. And Mike Rappel was a good support system for her. I mean, he had a good role. He knew his role. He understood what he was supposed to do in a sense, and he was a good tactician. A good planner. And Sister Maria would come in probably she'd practice maybe from 3 to 5, and we would practice from 6 to 9. So she had a small window of time to talk to Mike and get things ready. So he had a lot planned, and she would come in and just kind of, go through the plan. But, so they did, and they had a really good relationship, which is, it's tough to find, especially to get good supportive assistant coaches.
I would think especially this would be above what you would know as a student, but I would think also difficult to get that good coaching assistant coaching when you're NCAA Division II, right? And you're not going to be being compensated the way that other staff members on the men's team would be compensated.
For sure. Who knows what they were paid? I can't imagine Mike being paid a lot. He was also later on the softball coach and did very, very well, obviously, and Sister, who knows what she was getting? She was part-time. She was part-time, and but as we got better, I know she did try to renegotiate, her contract, and that's one of the reasons why she left Canisius to go to Marquette was they didn't really budge on what they wanted to pay her, and she got offered this other job, and she left.
As we've kind of already alluded to this, that as you're playing as a student athlete, you don't necessarily know some of the stuff that's going on, right? But behind the scenes, what coaches are kind of fighting for you. But what did you and your teammates, did you compare yourself to the guys' team? Was that just not something like, well, that's the guys' team, so they're going to get that? Did that ever enter into your thinking?
Never. And it's just so weird. And, but the one thing I have to, put an asterisk to is I commuted. So I wasn't in the dorms. I don't really know, sometimes what those type of conversations were. I remember us getting along very well with the men's teams and with the coaches. Now, what was really going on behind closed doors with Sister Maria and, and the administration, I don't know, but I never felt at one time that we were lacking, but I also don't know what the men were getting because at the time, we were getting practice gear, which this was in the 80s, there's teams that don't get practice gears now, we were getting 2 pairs of shoes. We were staying at good places. She was giving us meal money, we ate at nice restaurants, she made us dress up for games, and bring our uniforms. It was just, I don't ever remember feeling a lack, that, and I know she probably had to really work really hard to get those things, that's why I love her so much, because later on when, I worked with her at Marquette my first year, I saw how much she was working to get more for the program, and I never realized that was what was happening at Canisius, and then having my own programs and seeing what we had to work for, it just was like she's awesome. It was just awesome to be, again, I really feel like I grew up at the best time, during basketball, because I also was around one of the best women in Western New York.
Mm-hmm.
That, I'm sure, people have other, everybody has their opinion of Sister Maria, but mine is nothing but love. She was a great woman.
Yeah, so sorely missed.
Yeah,
she really is.
Yeah.
That was it 1983, the Elite Eight, Division II, NCAA Division II Elite Eight run. Obviously a great season for you guys. What do you remember about that?
Team. It was so fun, and so many of those games, those playoff games, were at Canisius, and it was packed. The gym was packed. Every family was there. We always had something after games for our families. Like, Deb Laux' family, they would invite us over. The whole team would be there. The parents, I'm sure Cara mentioned Slambas, but, we had those gatherings even at the bar at Slambas. We had a bar that sponsored us. It was just fun, and we had a really good team. I mean, I really do think that our team could compete, still, especially in the MAC. We had, Cara was amazing. Mary Kramovich was great. Karen Freeman. We just really had a really good team. I mean, I was coming off the bench that year, and it was fun. It was just, I learned so much about what, why teams are successful. And we had great leadership in our captains. Karen Freeman was our captain, and she was just a great leader for us.
You mentioned that gyms were packed for those.
They were packed.
Those playoff games. What was that like? I don't remember the Kessler Center being packed for a women's game unless it was before a doubleheader, in my time.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, students, we were playing in the afternoon, like a lot of Saturday afternoon games, especially with those playoff games. Mm-hmm. And the student body got so into it. But, I also think Sister created that as well. I mean, we were practicing against the cross-country team. So the guys on the cross-country team would come in. And again, that's way before this was even happening. And she got these guys to come in to practice against us. Now that's like the norm. All college teams have guys, so that really helped us. But that also created a community of, with that team. And the men's teams, and it was just, Cara also is very social, and it's a small school. There's a lot of camaraderie between the student body, the professors, and it was fun. It was nice. It was just a great atmosphere.
You mentioned, this is a more general question, but you mentioned you tried to play really well against Niagara every time that you played them. I'm wondering, like, the Little Three rivalry, so that would be with Niagara and St. Bonaventure as well. What were those games like? What was that like?
I remember more Niagara. Bonaventure, but I remember the Little Three rivalry more for the men. Mm-hmm. I do know that it was a rivalry, but I can't say that we were friends with a lot of those girls, so from Niagara and Bonaventure. But we knew it was a big game. But for me, I don't really recall it as such, more so like when the men were playing it, then you knew that was at the Buffalo Odd. Those games were always played. Yeah. As
you then decide what you're going to be doing after graduation, when did coaching enter your thought process?
Well, that was a never. Again, I always go back to, I was a really quiet, reserved kid, like being in front of people talking. I had to do phys ed at Canisius because I wanted to be an athletic trainer, but that was a combined degree. Like, you couldn't just do athletic training. So I was more the person that I really was into, like, athletic training. I loved athletic training at Canisius too. Great professors. We had a great camaraderie of students that were a part of that. But you had to also major in phys ed. So I had to do student teaching, and that was like painful for me. So I'm thinking, I'm not teaching. I know I'm not teaching. And then once I graduated, I had to do some type of, graduate work in athletic training, and that would have required me to leave. And I just didn't want to go through being homesick again and thinking, I don't know if I can really do this. So nothing really transpired. And then when Sister Maria decided that she wanted to go, she was leaving and going to Marquette, she came right up to me and she said, I want to hire you as my assistant coach. And I'm thinking, what the? That's the worst thing. I said, first of all, I didn't feel like I really didn't feel like I really knew the game really, really well. And I knew she had Mike Rappel. And I was thinking to myself, I'm not Mike Rappel. He's a great coach. He knows what he's doing. There's no way I can be this for her. But she convinced me. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to try this for a year and go out to Marquette and help her. And they were a really struggling program. It was a Division I program, Jesuit school, similar to Canisius, that was really looking for, a strong female coach. And, they hired Sister Maria, and, her job and our job was just to try to get a few wins that first year, just turning around. And we did it. Like we came back to Canisius, we played in the tournament, and we won the tournament with those kids. I mean, I don't even think we had double-digit wins for the year, but it was like 8 more than what they had the year before. So we started to turn it around, and working for her, again, it was eye-opening because I learned so much of the behind-the-scenes of what was really going on at Canisius, and then you realize, that there was a lot going on. She knew a lot of people knew her, so she pushed for things. So when I did it, I was scared. I was really scared. I didn't think I could do any of that. But as the year went on, I ended up loving it because, I could spend a lot of time on the basketball court, which was the place to be for me, and I could help kids get better. Just even if it just meant I was helping them with their shot or, dribbling or whatever. And I saw some like real growth and satisfaction with what I was doing. So, but I was a little homesick as usual. And I just didn't want to be that far away. So I told Sister, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to leave at the end of the year. And that's pretty much what I did. And I took a couple of years off from coaching, and I did some guidance and counseling work, getting my master's in that. And I was kind of a graduate assistant at Mount St. Joseph Academy, which was right across the street from Canisius. And Sister B was just a beautiful woman. She gave me this opportunity to teach, get my master's, and maybe do something more in the guidance and counseling role, which I really liked. But then Sister Maria, 2 years later, calls me, and she's like, Gina, I got this guy, he needs an assistant. Really good guy. His name's Jim Jaber at Siena. And I'm thinking, where's Siena? The first thing I said, well, where's Siena? Because I don't want to go too far away from home. She goes, it's still in New York State. It's only about 4 hours away. But he needs an assistant, and I know you're missing coaching, and I think you should look at this. So I said, okay, I'll go for an interview. And I drove up on a Sunday. I met Jim, and Jim's great guy. In fact, I just talked to Jim. Great man. And he, the rest was history. I went with him for a year, and then Sister Maria left Marquette, and he took the job at Marquette, which is so, and then I ended up taking the head job at Siena, which was crazy because I still wasn't ready, but yeah, it's kind of crazy, but
No one's ever ready.
nobody's, yeah,
Right.
that's so great. I say that now too. You're never ready for the position, but when you're thrown into it, you gotta, okay, you're swimming, you're treading water and you're swimming, and you better stay afloat, so but it was great. It was a great experience for me, and but it was hard. It's like,
Well, I mean, and I'm sure that when you were like, I'll take the job, and then you didn't expect to be there for 2 decades,
No.
2+ decades,
no,
right?
No, I mean, again, Jim Jaber, I absolutely loved, and I was learning a lot about basketball recruiting from him more than anything else, and So I was so, again, green with so many things that I really didn't know what I was doing with so many of those things. And then when he got the job at Marquette, ironically, I'm thinking, all right, I'm probably going to go with him to Marquette. And I was more ready then. I had lived away from home. I'm thinking I could go back there, and I really wanted to go with him. And I said, okay, so I'm going to go with you. And he goes, no. I go, what do you mean? He goes, they're going to ask you to be the head coach here. I'm like, I'm not going to be the head coach. There's no way, I can't do this job, And he's like, well, you're never going to be ready. And he goes, the only thing I could tell you to do is just surround yourself with good people that, whatever you're lacking, you should just hire. And, I took that advice to heart, but, it took me a long time to decide whether or not to take the job because, it was a big move. And, I literally had 2 years of college coaching experience before I got that job. And, but, Siena was good to me. They helped me grow into the position. And then as we got better and better, things got bigger and bigger. And it was a great experience.
What do you think was the key to the success that you had at Siena?
Well, first, Jim Jaber, giving me the advice of hiring good people, Second, I would say my family, they just really gave me a good foundation of understanding what teamwork really is in a family. So I really tried to lean on that a lot. My success at Canisius and Sister Maria and the teams we built, I leaned on that a lot. And obviously, you need good talent. And so, we really tried to recruit the right kids there, the best fit. We didn't always have that, but we didn't always have the best talent. But I really do feel like we had good kids. For the majority of the time, we had good kids. And, those kids worked really hard, to help us win games. And we had some really good years, and then we had some not so great years, but and then I had a good support system, with the athletic directors, and they believed in me, and it was a great experience. And as at the tail end of my career there, we just weren't winning, but they gave me enough time to do that. It's just, after a while, there just comes a time where it's like, okay, you're not getting the job done. What are you going to do now? So, but it was a great experience.
Mm-hmm. And then you went to LeMoyne. Tell me about your time there.
After Siena, I took a year off, but I went to the University of Rhode Island because I wasn't quite sure whether or not I wanted to stay in coaching. And at the University of Rhode Island was Kathy Ingles, who also was an excellent coach. Coached at Vermont and was at BC and did really well at those programs. And she was a friend of mine that I had connected with, and just said, hey, she had called me and said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm not really sure. She goes, why don't you come here? I'm like, to do what? She goes, just come part-time, for the year, and we'll compensate you, whatever. And just so that, she goes, I think I could really use somebody with your experience. So I wasn't quite sure I wanted to do that. And then later on, she kept calling me and saying, come on, just do it, So I go to Rhode Island. I was like thinking, wow, that state is a gem. That was beautiful there. It's like I was living right on the ocean. I was like, this is amazing. And we didn't have a great team, but I had a good experience with her. And that kind of led into more of giving me my wings back to coach. I think I want to do this again, but I didn't want to do it. I didn't really want to get back into the Division I spectrum. I felt like if I was going to get a job, it was probably going to be something similar to Siena. And I felt like I just felt like been there, done that with that position. So I wasn't going to be getting this high, SEC position or whatever. So I just felt like any job I was going to get, it was similar, and that didn't thrill me. But when LeMoyne opened up, I thought of it as this could be so cool because they're Division I or Division II, and they play in the NE10, which the NE10 at that time was one of the premier conferences in the country. Bentley was there, women's basketball at Bentley was great. So So they were the measuring stick for all teams, all Division II women's team in the country. And I thought that's kind of going to an SEC and ACC program in Division I. In addition to that, I thought of I would be closer to my family, and my dad wasn't feeling great, like wasn't doing well health-wise, and I thought this would be awesome because I can, take a ride to see my parents at night, come home, it's only a 2-hour ride. And also, it was a 10-month position, which meant that I could do my work in the summer anywhere. And so, I do have I have a partner in Saratoga, so I was leaving her, and I was thinking, okay, this all might work. I could get an apartment in Syracuse. I could see my family. I could be home in the summer and do my work from home. So it was all kind of like, falling into place for me. And, the basketball, I felt we could win an NE10 championship. And I thought we could win a national championship. So we were fighting for national championships, not just the NE10 championship. But they hadn't won. Like they were not a good program at the time, and they were really searching just for somebody to, get them back and on good playing levels, Well, I come in there and I just said, hey, these are my goals. I think we can win a national championship, definitely an NE10 championship. And they thought, Matt Bassett, the athletic director there, thought I was nuts, like he goes, you understand, like this isn't Siena, your recruiting budget's like $6,000. I'm like, I get that. I do. I got that, and I can work with that. I have more contacts, I don't have to go out all the time. So it all kind of like worked well. And my first year, we made it to the playoffs, and I had great kids, just great kids that I still keep in touch with today. And then little by little, we started to recruit some really good players, and we won the NE10 championship. I think it was in 2018, and went to the Sweet 16. So it was great. But then the next year is when COVID hit right at the end of our season, and they canceled our playoffs. So we could never get to that next spot. And then 2020, after a while I was, contemplating what I wanted to do. And, I just thought it was time to move on,
Was there, now, you mentioned you were a shy kid.
Yeah.
Sister Maria, Canisius helped get you out of your shell, but you still were, don't want to teach. I'm not real sure about was there a point when it kind of started to feel more comfortable for you coaching? Was there a point where you felt some confidence in that?
Yeah, for sure. One of the biggest reasons why I was so intimidated with coaching is that, especially at Siena, there were a lot of speaking engagements, and that intimidated me a lot. Public speaking was definitely not my thing. I didn't want to be doing that, and it was the reason why I was so apprehensive in taking the job, because I knew that there were going to be speaking engagement. And one in particular that I remember was this Hall of Fame event that both the men's and women's basketball coaches had to speak at. And that petrified me. So that was the beginning of it. And, I remember when I took that job, the day after I would go out for runs, and I started working on my speech, which was in September, and this is May. I started working on the speech in my head, what I was going to say in September. So that was one of the biggest things that I felt, if I could conquer that, I would be a much better coach. Plus, also speaking to my kids, it's like what was I going to say to them in a locker room? How was I going to motivate them? What do you, I didn't say a lot, So, but once I started to feel more comfortable in those areas, and I had good people around me that would help me even say, would even tell me what to say, little by little, I gained the confidence. And then experience itself, I was a student of the game. I asked every men's coach at Siena if I could, talk to them in the summer about what they did. And they would, from like A to Z, they would tell me, from preseason to the end, we talk about strategy. they taught me so much. And there were quite a few men's coaches that went through that program, so I was so lucky. I mean, from Mike Dean, Bob Byer, Paul Hewitt, Fran McCaffrey, Louis Orr, Rob Lanier, there were just so many, and they were all really talented in terms of what they were teaching, and they all did different things. So my coaching style became kind of a melting pot of all these coaches, and then I would go to clinics, and the more and more that I did things, the more experience I got, the more we were winning, or, the more I tried things, the more I leaned on myself, So when I went to LeMoyne, that's when I really found myself. And think about that. That's like 23 years of coaching. And then when I went to LeMoyne, I really just felt like, you know what you're doing. I was confident in what I was going to be doing, what I was going to be running, how I was going to be recruiting. And so there was a point when I was definitely more confident in what I was doing, thankfully.
Got there, right?
We got there. Yeah.
What does Title IX mean to you?
I think Title IX, honestly, it became more of a big thing for me when I was coaching. Title IX, when I was in, like I said, Sister Maria, she almost masked it, because we had everything. In my opinion, we had everything, and maybe somebody else on the team could say differently. But Title IX for me, it gave us the right, to push for things when it gave you kind of a backbone. That's kind of, for me, how I look at it. Like, okay, is this, can we fight for this according to Title IX, And I think that gave me the strength to push for things more than anything else, especially when I was coaching.
What is a favorite or a couple favorite memories that you have?
Well, my favorite memories are, like the kids I've coached are, there's a lot that, I still keep in touch with that have become friends of mine today, which is just, that's just a blessing. I mean, they're just good friends of mine now, which is awesome. My favorite memories with Canisius are obviously the 1983 team that went really far. But then our next year, we also had a great season. But just the camaraderie, just the fun we had off the court, the times we went to those, parent parties, the bus rides, those things. And then with my coaching career, again, it's, the camaraderie that we shared. When we would come to Buffalo and play Niagara and Canisius, we would always go to my sister's house or, my mom's house, and she'd have a good big dinner, and we'd have a lot of fun there. The MAC championship, same thing at LeMoyne, the camaraderie. We tried to build the same thing, it's just the teams, fun. Some of the special games like the NE10 championships when we beat Bentley, which was pretty cool. Yeah.
Gina, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was great. I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.